So
No,
maybe
absolutely.
talk about like the cultural differences and how different ecosystems are different. Yeah.
Sure. So for me, coming from New York and then, you know, going back to Hong Kong, because I had been there earlier, it was a lot of fun in a number of ways. And one way was that I suppose I know things have changed a lot, but certainly 2012, 2013, the way that just say like the general population would think of a startup was very different from what I had experienced in New York. So in New York, and in I'd say many places, not everywhere in the US, but many places in the US, the general feeling about if you meet somebody who says they're running a startup, in general, it seems, oh, okay, that's something positive, or you might be curious about like learning more, like, or you might even say like, oh yeah, me too, or like my friend is also building something, right? And wasn't at all the case in Hong Kong. Certainly when I was there, I remember what an individual in the first boot camp that I ran there told me, and he said, this is middle of 2012. He said, in Hong Kong, and he kind of said this in light of I guess like going out and trying to meet a potential date, but he said this. So he said, like, if I ever met a girl, and she asked me what I did, and I said, like, oh, I'm working on a startup. What she would hear would be, wow, he has no money.
You're unemployed.
He couldn't find a job, right? He's like, he's not able to find a job, and then eventually he'll go back to some back office role in a bank, But right now he just, he has this hobby and he's wasting time, and
Yeah.
and likewise, in that first boot camp, I actually had I had one team that I had accepted, and they were both masters. They were just graduating from a master's program at, I forget which university in Hong Kong, in computer science, and was excited, to have them in, and they backed out at the really past the last moment. And the reason that they gave was their parents made them get real jobs, right? And so in Hong Kong as well, like you have a lot of, many people live at home, say until getting married or a little later. Housing is expensive. So the parents have a little more influence than, say, they might in New York, Los Angeles, Silicon Valley, or what I was used to seeing. So, because the kids are expected to like contribute to the expenses and all that, which is understandable, but that has a lot of influence on who decides to go into starting a startup or who does not have that that opportunity.
Right.
And when I was in Hong Kong, I certainly saw, I mean, I'm not sure what it is now, but when I was there, the startup community, I would say, was maybe about 1/3 expat. So it was a pretty large expat proportion for a place like Hong Kong.
Right.
There was, which was good in terms of bringing new ideas in, but it also kind of said a lot about, how how there are like, just different, structures or, whether it's a family restriction or just like a cultural kind of a hindrance to running a startup. So as a result, I had to be just I had to appreciate that, right? Because the way that term is thrown around, it might not always be a positive term, startup. It might not always be a positive term. And what I saw, so, I don't know, what I think I saw at the time, there were also a few other, I don't know, international groups that were talking about bringing a startup accelerator into Hong Kong around the same time I was there. They all backed out in the end because they realized, well, Hong Kong is not just New York in the South China Sea. It's its own place, right? I can't just take something that worked somewhere else and then copy it and move it there. There's a lot of just differences depending on where you go. You can't look at, well, this is a big city, wealthy city, modern city. I can just take something that worked in a
Right.
totally different part of the world and pop it in.
So it's
Yeah,
uh-huh.
but at the same.
Good.
Oh, no, I was the last point I was going to make was at the same time, Hong Kong was a great
Mm-hmm.
location for building a startup accelerator at that point because it was so international. A lot of the same platforms were used. So like Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter. Like a lot of the same platforms were used that would be applicable to, say, an international audience.
Yeah.
Totally different if you were going across the border, to Shenzhen, it'd be like a totally different
Yeah.
mix.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes,
and
that's
since Hong Kong, yeah,
uh-huh.
no, and
Since
so
Hong
like
Kong, yeah.
I mean, it kind of forced startups in Hong Kong to think internationally in the beginning because otherwise you're
Okay.
thinking, well, it's a big city, but it's still 7 million people, and I need
Mm-hmm.
to think bigger than that if I am really building something that's scalable.
Yeah.
So Hong Kong was a good location to be able to do something like that.
Yeah, what I saw in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is this unique kind of mix, East West, and there's like half expat, like 1/3 expat you mentioned, and local Hong Kong people, and also returnees and mainland Chinese as well, right? So it's almost like you need to choose if you go to mainland China
Yeah.
or, but if you want to, your startup to be targeting U.S. market doesn't make sense to be in Hong Kong. So if you're in Hong Kong, you almost need to focus on Southeast Asia, right?
Sure.
Or like the Asian countries, right?
Sure.
And I've seen many startups they have to choose, right? They either have to, okay, I need to go to China and I launch in China, or if I stay in Hong Kong and I don't want to go into China, then I need to go Southeast Asia. And there are always different languages and cultures also, right? So from the startup that you've seen that are successful, what is the strategy that they have employed, so far?
Well, wherever they start, if it's Hong Kong or elsewhere, that's really just the starting place. So, like the general ways that you would do this would be if you were already in, say, a country that has a market that's big enough, US, China, right? Just serving that domestic market is a very big opportunity. If you're instead in a location, whether it's a country or a city that is, not big enough for something that is, a scalable company, you use that as a starting point. So if you are starting in Hong Kong, you might start there because it's easy, compared to many places in Asia Pacific. It's easy to start a business. The legal structure is understandable. It's easy to also get people to come in. Running the accelerator in Hong Kong, it was very easy to get somebody to go in for 3 months, even if they had no intention to stay long term. Some of them did,
Okay.
but it's an easy place for somebody to relocate for 3 months. It's more difficult to do that if you are locating in China or in some parts of Southeast Asia. So but then you also are thinking, okay, well, I start here, I kind of get my first version of it out locally. What is the next location I go to, and then the next and next, and you see the same thing, I think, many different parts of the world. So like that kind of mindset happens in like North Africa and Middle East, where you might say, okay, we're starting in Lebanon, but the next team members I'm going to hire will be in in Jordan, or they'll be in Egypt for developers, or they'll be somewhere else for design, say. And so you might take that approach of, well, there might be these little pockets of expertise around the region. I might take advantage of the expertise, or in some cases like a cost structure difference, or just like a localization difference, whether it's language or actually like there's some cultural difference that impacts the product itself.
Right.
But yeah, for most of the world, simply staying in your local market is not enough. It's really just like a handful of countries that you might be able to do that in.
Right, right. So is Hong Kong more like a bouncing board to other markets or other places in
Yeah, I
that
mean,
area?
it could be, but I mean, certainly when I was there, it was an easy place to kind of show up and try something,
Yeah.
whether you stay there long term or whether you said, okay, well, this is where I'm based, but I'm actually going to be traveling, half the time, and I'm going to, go to these 10 other,
Uh-huh.
these, on a repeated basis because that's where the customers are or that's where the rest of the team is.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but but yeah, I mean, that was a lot of my experience in Hong Kong. And it was certainly, I mean, it was a real pleasure working there because it was so social and collegial. And I was able to do things there when I was there running the accelerator, it was really just about a year. I think just like exactly a year. I was able to do things there in a year that would take me 5 years,
Wow.
else in the US. Because I mean, very easy to get connected quickly. Like the number of times that I would, you know, meet somebody in the morning, they would introduce me to like two other people, then I'd bump into like a fourth person, just like walking, and then so a lot of those connections that were essential to being able to make something work out, a program
Yeah.
like that. I was able to do that very fast. So yeah, so
Yeah,
like
Hong Kong, you can meet like 7 people in one day,
yeah,
right? Which in cities
yeah,
where you drive, you just can't
exactly,
physically do that.
right.
Yeah. And yeah, just connecting like how startups and design is related, because I'm also a big proponent of design entrepreneurship. I believe designers should learn more about business and marketing,
Mm-hmm.
and and utilize the design skills that we have, uh, not just creating great interfaces, but more in envisioning what the product could be in the beginning, right? Because some of the startups are coming up with new business models, new types of businesses, like with blockchain and AI now. Some of these are completely new. Like it's like blank sheet, right? Like how do you create AI, to help us work better and faster, requires visioning, right?
Right.
Um, that's how. And yeah, actually, I don't know if I told you. Right now, I have a CXO offer with tech startup founders, where
Great.
we act as the chief experience officer, where we just help them maybe one day a month, where and at the same time we train up junior designers who are maybe just trying to enter the field. Because one thing that we notice with a tech startup is in the beginning phases, you like they bootstrap, right?
Right.
There's not enough funding, and then it's impossible for them to hire a very senior designer, or even like marketing, right? Or other functions like finance. A CTO is probably the second hire, after having the CEO. The first person that they hire would be a CTO, right? And then
Right.
other than that, like, all the others are maybe freelancing, or that's the bootstrapping model, right?
Right.
Um, and because the UX community is also very new in certain places like Hong Kong, like there's like 1% senior people, right? So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And that's how we're trying to work with tech startup that way too.